served the United States throughout all of our wars, you and I wouldn't be standing here having this conversation.
Well, especially me. I mean, my parents met in London when bombs were falling, and the Americans came over and helped them. I mean,
well,
there's no question about that.
They were desperate times, and even when we couldn't, when the United States couldn't help Britain, the United States was still largely an isolationist country.
Right.
But President Roosevelt at the time found ways around it through Lend-Lease and things like that, where the British could loan us the use of certain of their bases, and in return we sent them World War I destroyers, which had been mothballed, to help them fight the battle. And of course we eventually found our way into World War II when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and a lot of other American bases at the same time.
That's interesting, because it's something I've never really understood, Lend-Lease, but I know it was terribly important.
Well,
but that was, yeah.
Roosevelt understood the importance of keeping Britain functioning, and it was literally a question of keeping Britain functioning. They were in it alone.
Right.
All the other European countries had been overrun.
Right.
And they ran right up to the coast in France.
Right.
And they were preparing for the invasion of Britain, and it was a very desperate time. But at the same time, as I said, Roosevelt couldn't, because he was restrained by a law from directly aiding the British in their war efforts. So they found ways around it. Some might say it might have wagged their toes right up on the legal line, but you got to weigh that against the desperate times that we found, because we were next.
Yeah.
The United States was next.
Yeah. Australia
if we didn't stop the Germans.
Yeah.
And the Japanese, who were then our enemies, no longer.
Right.
If we didn't stop them,
yeah.
the United States was next.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of actions like that born of desperate times.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it worked out the way it did.
So you have a background in history, or is it just something that you're interested in?
I don't know if it's I'm a student of history, I guess you would say.
Right.
And I think it's interesting the way things happened back then, and it's kind of depressing that we don't seem to have the same resolve that we did back then. I often wonder to myself, if there was such a desperate time foisted on us again, whether or not we could rise to the challenge. I'd like to think that we can. I know our service members can, but whether the civil population would fall into place is a different matter. Back then, I was having a conversation with this fine fella out in the hallway. Everybody during the war did their part.
Yes, they did. In
small parts and in large. It didn't matter whether they were in small parts collecting tin, because it was used. It was repurposed for munitions and things like that, or simply homemakers collecting fat from their cooking and turning that in, because it could be repurposed for the war effort. And women, for the first time, went to work in war production plants.
Bethlehem's
There's
Skill.
pictures out here in the hallway of women firefighters aboard a Navy ship. You never saw that before, but in those days the men were away fighting. So the women filled in the ranks, and they did a superb job. And they were flyers, and they were manufacturing planes and tanks and all manner of things. And the country was one together. And that's what won the war here in the United States and throughout the larger world.
Right, and so that's what we need. We need people to come together for the peace.
Well, we need people to come together for the peace, and we just have to find a way around all this dissension that seems to permeate American life today. We have a lot more in common than the differences that seem to divide us. But people just hear more of this drumbeat of dissension, and it's nothing but a distraction. And we've got to move past all that.
So what are your goals to bring people together so that we can? I mean, at the moment, it's like we're on the brink of something, and we could either I mean, we hope not. What are your goals for?
I think people have got to take a deep breath and ask themselves where we would be if we continued down that road, and have honest face-to-face conversations with one another. And I think they would find that they have a lot more in common than they don't.
Yeah.
And you know, too much of the time they watch the news, and the news get a lot of the hyperbole that's coming out of Washington is meant to get people stirred up for political purposes, and it has an effect on people. I myself find myself turning the news off sometimes, because there comes a point when it's not news anymore, it's disinformation. And it's done for political purposes, and it's just not helpful. You know,
Right.
I mean,
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Everything's sort of hitting us at once. We've got the climate crisis. We've got all these, you know, we've got rising prices. We've got inflation. We've still got a pandemic. It's like, you know, you've got to try and figure out how, well, as a political person, and Vanessa as always a political person, what do you have any suggestions of what an individual can do? Because that's, at the moment, we're not talking about...
Have an open mind and an open heart, and think about finding the truth and living the truth and speaking the truth, and staying away from all this destructive hyperbole, because that's all it is. You know, and we have to get back to working toward what's in the better interest of us all, because we're one people.
Right.
All this division that some people want to create is just not helpful.
So do you have anything to add, Vanessa?
Well, for me, I just think that being passive is past.
Right.
I think it's time for people to really, as Lou said, you cannot sit by and be an observer of what's happening in this country. You have to be a participant. And if it's anything that I can say, anything that Lanni has said, I hope that it would be to participate and not. It's okay to be angry, but to turn your anger into positive actions. And I just would like to see people just get up and off of the armchair, stop watching it in a little box, a little square, and come up front and see everything for what it is. And know that each one of us can affect change that would make this community, this world better for our children, our future generations.
Right, which is why we're here today. Right.
And I think it would do an awful lot of good to have many more younger people here.
Yes.
Have them put down their iPhones and all those other electronic gadgets
And stuff.
and hear about the issues that brought the folks outside together. Hear about their service, and not just what they did, but why they did it.
Right.
And maybe some of them would gain a greater appreciation for the things we're talking about. You know, it would maybe they begin to think about themselves. There's a larger purpose than just yourself.
Right.
Be as Vanessa said, be a part of something larger than yourself.
That's right. You know, one thing that I love about this museum, ACES Museum, Veterans Museum, as I look on the wall and I see white, I see Japanese, I see Italian, Irish, I see black, Native American, you know, it's amazing that this is what this country was built on, was the unity of all of these people here together. And there are folks out there that want to not tell this story. And this is important because it wasn't just one particular group of people who made this country. It was this beautiful hodgepodge of people coming from different backgrounds and races and stories that came together to protect this land, and not only our land but other nations as well. And that is the beauty of the ACES Veterans Museum, is to keep talking about how we all come together to do good and do what is right.
Okay, we're at ACES Museum. It is November 11th, 2021, which is Veterans Day. Susanna J. Dodgson, God bless you and thank you for listening. Okay.